just a shorter presentation. This is, oh, there we go. Just an introduction to Power BI, table of contents, what we'll cover quickly in this PowerPoint. Basically, you guys have used Power BI before, so you know what it is, but it's a visualization tool made by Microsoft, and we can make interactive visualizations with it for BI purposes. It's simple to use, and we can create our own reports and dashboards. So there's three major parts to it. So we can create those reports on Power BI desktop. We can publish them to Power BI services, which we probably won't cover because I think that's what you were talking about, where you need a subscription or you need to pay for it. And then you can view and interact with them on the web browser, which we will be able to do, or on your mobile phone. Okay, so what is Power BI Desktop? Basically, free application we can install. I think you guys already have it all installed. Transforms and visualizes your data. So there's three main sections to it, and I'll go through them when we actually have it open. But there's the report view, which is your canvas for building those interact data in kind of like a spreadsheet Excel, viewport. And then there's the relationship view, which actually helps us define the relationships between our data and the data model. Okay, so we can let Power BI do that automatically, or we can define it manually. There's the download link again. So then what Power BI, this just talks about Power BI services a little bit, which I'll just skip over. And then obviously you can get it on your phone for your mobile apps. So Power BI data connectors, this is kind of the cool part with Power BI, and we'll get experience with connecting to a CSV file today. They're actually up on Blackboard if you want to download those right now and save them into your week one folder. You can download them from Blackboard in week one. It allows us to connect to a ton of different sources. So we can connect to Excel, we can connect to a Wikipedia spreadsheet online, we can connect to a CSV file, we can connect to SQL Server, or even like an Oracle database or something like that. All you have to do is hit the Get Data button and then select from the drop down. And then we'll talk a little bit about visuals. We'll get into that in a little bit. So let's open up Power BI and get our first hands-on experience with it. Cool, so I'm just gonna run this in the background as we go. There we go. So this talks a little bit again about what it is, why we use it. It's the leading industry among BI platforms, right? And the reason why is because it's absolutely free to get at a time. So that's how you install. The links there again. A couple options and settings we need to change right away, so we're just all on the same page. So just go to File and then Options and Settings here and select Options. So I'll just open up my Power BI on my end and show you. I've already done these settings, but I'll just demonstrate where you go. So there's a thing that pops up the first time you open Power BI. You can just close that. It asks if you want to get a license, and then if you want to open up like a recent document or something like that, you can just close and ignore, and then we'll go to File, Options and Settings right here, and then click Options. And then the settings you want to change here are actually highlighted in the PowerPoint, so I'll just go back to that slide, and you're going to want to go to the Preview Features tab on the left, and what this tab is just kind of experimental features that, as Power BI releases its monthly update every month, they kind of put out these preview features. Some of them, you might just want to remove just so that you don't have any glitches. So I just turned them all off just to keep it easy for us. So I had Sparklines and I had the infrastructure update. I just clicked those both off and hit OK. And then the other one you want to change is the current file. Under current file, the data load tab, you want to deselect this, make sure both of these are deselected. So for me, update or delete relationships when refreshing data was already unselected, but I had to turn off auto detect new relationships after data is loaded. And what that does is it just allows us to manually do it so that we can actually make those connections ourselves and, you know, just understand how to do that before we just let the program do it automatically. So make sure you have those two sections turned off. And I go to, let's see, preview features, they're all off. And I go to the data load and you can turn this one off. So it's actually for current file, or what you can do is you can turn it off for global data load, but we'll just do it for the current file, you know, as we edit it, just because we don't want to change that. Maybe globally we want to turn it back on eventually. So if we just do it for the current file, it'll just do it for this project. And one last thing that you can change is in regional settings. You can change this from English to United States. You can leave it on Canada for now too if you want. The only thing is with the CSV files we use and the date, month, year formats, as well as currencies and stuff, I'm pretty sure Canada and the US use the same month, day, year, or not DDMMYYYY. So it should be fine. If you leave it Canada, you can let me know. If you just want to leave it United States and be sure, then do that. Because yeah, the currency as well. Sometimes some countries use like a comma instead of a colon or a semicolon for currency or decimal separators. So that's one thing to be aware of. And this is per current file, so it's not a global change. You can change it globally if you want to, but again, we'll just keep it for this file. So I'll leave mine Canada. We'll experiment with it, and then we just hit OK. All right. So we're in Power BI, and I'm going to show you on the left here. These are our three main sections. Okay. So we have the report section, we have the data section, and then we have, I'll actually click it so you can see it. It'll just be gray because there's no data in here yet. And then we have the model section. Okay. So these three, what we'll use in our workflow to create an entire BI system. So what does that workflow look like? So here's the three core views that we're going to be working with. The actual order is different than what they appear. So first we start with the data tab, right? And this is the Excel kind of spreadsheet thing that I was talking about. And then what you do once your data is all clean and you've got all of the data that you want to use, then you start to build those tables and relationships on your data model tab. And then the last step is actually designing those interactive reports and exploring the visual data and creating those dashboards for the executives. Right? So coming back here, we'll go through the ribbon at the top a little bit and just talk about some of the different features that you can access from here. So the Home tab, this is where I can actually insert data. So I can insert data from an Excel workbook, from a Power BI data set, a SQL Server, CSV file we'll get a little bit of experience with today, or you can create your own queries. And if you hit more here at the bottom, you can actually, you have access to a whole ton. It just takes a second to load for me, of different data sources that you can plug into on Power BI. I think it's still opening. There we go. So you can load from PDF. You can load from a folder. If we scroll through here, this is just insane. Azure, AWS, GitHub. Yeah, there. It's literally anything you can think of. Cool. Going through here, this transform data button is going to be really useful. So this is actually how we can go in. So extract, transform, load. If you want to change the casings, uppercase, lowercase, remove colons, or remove like a hyphen in between two words or something, that's how we do that. And then obviously to add visuals, it'd be this tab here. You can also find, basically in Power BI, you can find a lot of the same contextual menus multiple ways. So here's another way to add visuals. There's always like 2 or 3 ways to do it. You could also like right click and do that as well. Modeling is another way to interact with the modeling page, which we'll talk a little bit about next week. And then the view, if you want to change the design or the page layout, you can do that. If you want to add grid lines, this is, more so for the actual report side of things. And then the help tab here is, helpful resources. So up in the help tab, you have access to the Power BI community. There's a spot for the developers, or if you want to use, get some guided learning or training videos, as well as there is a Power BI YouTube channel, as well as a sponsored by Microsoft YouTube channel called Guy in a Cube. So that's that reference to a cube again. You can access any of the stuff on the help tab here, or they have a blog, as well as something called Power BI user groups, or PUGs, they call them. And you can access that at pbiusergroup.com. Cool. So let's get started with actually playing around with some data here. So I showed you how to get your data connector. I showed you how to use transform data. So I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. Yeah, let's go back here. Okay. And then hit transform data again, and you're going to open something called the query editor. So it's actually just opening on my second monitor here. I'll just bring it over as it loads. And it will be blank. There won't be anything because we don't have any data yet. And we're just going to create our own table. So we'll just hit this enter data here. But if you wanted to use a source as your data, you could do that as well. So we're just going to enter some nominal data, make some stuff up here just to get used to the query editor and a little bit about it. So here, a create table window opens, and I can double click this and create a column called fname. If I hit tab, it'll open up a new column, or to add a new column. I can do last name, and then I could do something like employee ID. And then you can just add whatever information you want. You can type your name and employee ID, and I'll just add a couple other rows. Cool, like that. Okay, and then we can hit OK on this. So when it comes to connecting and transforming data, the query editor here, so once I hit OK on this, and you'll see the query editor in full form now, is kind of our cockpit, right? So this is going to be where we do spending a lot of our time in this section right here, this query editor. So there's a lot going on in here, and I'll take it kind of one step at a time and point them out. I also have them highlighted in the PowerPoint for it to help you. But this is basically where we're going to find all the tools we need to transform and shape our data, okay? So here, now that I've added some data to it, you can see that it's added some code up here. We've got a table on the left-hand side. We've got some applied steps that have been added, as well as some properties that have changed. So we'll go through one step at a time in the PowerPoint, and I'll kind of point them out to you. So it's a formula bar. It's very similar to Excel, but it's actually got some code that looks a little different. It's called M code, and I didn't even write it. It just showed up automatically, right? This code is automatically generated, and it basically applies a bunch of different procedures in steps to your table. So for those of you who are advanced Excel users, you might have written something like a VBA code to do this, like a macro or something like that in Visual Basic. Don't get too nervous about this, because we don't need to know M code to be able to use Query Editor. And in fact, I'm not actually going to be teaching M code at all. You can write it from scratch and edit that code afterwards if you want, but we're not going to use it. So don't get worried or scared that there's this weird chunk of code up in this formula bar. We don't really need to cover it or know how it works too much. On the left side over here, this highlighted red box, you'll see a spot called a section called queries. And inside of queries, we see our table. So in this spot of the query editor, all of our different data sources will show up. So if I had a bunch of different tables, you'd see them here as well. Right now, I only have the one table. You can kind of click through those tables and preview your data here. So if I had another table, I could click it and it would load a preview of the data in this section. Cool. So on the right side, highlighted over here where it says properties, the most important thing to point out here is that we can change the name of our table, right? And you want to make sure that you get your table name correct right off the bat, because it can be a pretty big headache to change them later on once you apply those changes. So you change the name after, it can be a bit of a headache to calculate that name change in different fields everywhere. So rule of thumb, be very strategic off the bat when you call your table name from step one, right? And then this last section here, last but not least, is this applied steps window down here in the lower right. This is very powerful. So basically what's happening here is every time you make a change to your data, and you apply some sort of shaping or transformation, Power BI will record what's called an applied step using that M code and then add it to the list. So if you want to ever undo something, or if you want to see like a list of changes or history that you've made to your table, it'll show up in the applied steps on the right hand side. So what that means is every time this connection is refreshed, Power BI is going to run through that set of steps on the side, and it's going to transform your data. So it's a really great way to automate things like cleansing, data cleansing, or ETL processes. So imagine, say you added like a new column or something like that, and you wanted to make a change where you only selected alternating rows, and then you removed hyphens and you capitalized the first letter of every word. It would run through that on the new column automatically, and you wouldn't have to set up that process. So you don't have to do all of that stuff manually. It basically automates it. Perhaps the most helpful thing here is that this section is not set in stone. So once you make one of those applied changes and you think you might be good, you actually can change it. So you can click on this little X here to the left of the applied step, or the applied change, and you can delete it from this applied steps panel, or applied step, so that you can see the impact it's happening. You can alter it so that it actually is maybe capitalizing the second letter of every word or something like that, and you can modify each step in the process. Cool. You can also see, so if I go back to Power BI here, there we go. If I click through here, if I expand my M code formula bar, and if you're following along, you can try this with me. If I click through here, you can see that that M code actually changes, right? So these are the two applied steps. So here at source, we can see that my code was taken from a JSON document, decompressed from binary, first name, and here's the columns that it's defining. And then the second applied step that's happening is it's actually setting my data types. So you can see here, it automatically detected that the first two columns will be strings. So that's what that little ABC is for. And then the third column is actually going to be numbers. And we can see that change here because if I just click on the first applied step, we can see employee ID is actually technically right now considered a string. And if I click the second applied step, it changes it to an integer. Very cool. All right. In the query editing panel, so I want to show you the ribbon that we're going to be interacting with. So here we have the home ribbon, the home tab. Basically, this includes some general settings, your data source, as well as parameters table. Yeah.
What if you don't have the query settings on the right side?
Oh, like this isn't showing up for you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see applied steps at all?
No, like that entire thing, like query settings on the right side with properties, name, table, applied setting, applied steps.
Should be a way to.
Okay, so view.
So you're just missing these two?
Okay, now I have it. Like I just have to go to view and then click on query settings.
Okay, yeah, so that's what I was looking for, but I didn't see it on mine. Oh, it's just this button here?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so if you're missing that, okay, awesome. I was looking for like a little check mark like this, but it's this big button right here, query settings, and then they pop up. Awesome. Cool. Well, that's good to know. So looking at our home tab, thanks for that. I didn't know that little button was there. We can control our data source settings, parameters, table properties, etc., as well as some of the most common table transformation tools right here. So like choosing columns, removing columns, if you wanted to keep certain rows or remove rows. So the next tab is the transform tab. And this transform tab includes additional tools that allow us to modify our existing columns. So you can split or group columns. You can transpose your table. You can extract text, which we'll get our hands on in a little bit right here with the extract tool. So if you wanted to extract text between, a specific delimiter, if you had an email and you wanted to get their username before the @ symbol or something like that, then you could extract that text and create a new column based off of it. And then the add column is basically if you wanted to grab something from a specific column, like a specific type of information, say you had their full name, but you didn't have a first name column, well, you could extract the first word before a space and then add it to a new column called first name. And the add column basically has the same tools as the transform column, instead of just overwriting the same data. And so it keeps the original full name column, but it adds a new first name column with that extraction taking place. Cool. So let me see. Yeah, this is a handy tool to know. So with this little table that we've created so far right here, hopefully you're still following along. If we go back to, I believe it was in the home tab, we're going to talk about this little section right here. So the choose columns, remove columns, keep rows, and remove rows. So first off, you can choose to keep or remove certain columns or rows from your table. So there's a few interesting options here. If you click the little down arrow below, mine's just a little laggy here. So you can actually choose the columns and select the ones that you'd like to remove or select the ones that you'd like to keep. And that might not seem very important off the bat, but it actually can be really helpful in specific cases. So say you have a connection to a table that has a variable number of columns. One month it might have 10, the next month it might have 20. And at the end of the day, you always want to have the same set of 5 columns no matter what. If you were to open up the query editor and manually remove each one that you didn't want, it still would end up in your final table. So what you can do, on the other hand, is select the 5 columns that you actually want and only want to show up. And then Power BI would take those 5 columns, the only 5 that you need, and then actually just disregard and ignore the other ones that are added, and then you'd be good to go moving forward. It is a little bit of a nuance, like a small feature, but it can be really helpful to know when you actually need it. And as far as rows are concerned, you have really basic options. So with keep rows here, you can keep the top rows. So if you wanted to keep just the headers, or if you wanted to just keep the footers, or keep a range of rows, you could also make a rule where you keep only duplicates, or you can remove duplicates. So if you wanted to clean your data based on having duplicate first names or duplicate last names, you could do that, which is a really helpful tool instead of having to go through it one by one by one. If you had like a row that was a grand total or a sum of all your prices and you wanted to get rid of that, so you just had the data before, then you can remove all of those summation rows. And if you wanted to do like alternate rows or something like that, where you take every other, then you could do that as well. It can be a really great way to create lookup tables or something like that if you wanted to create like unique, no duplicate entry kind of data. You can also do all your sorting, A to Z stuff. Where is it? Right here. By clicking on this little down arrow. Mine is very, very slow right now. There we go. So you can sort ascending, very similar to Excel, or sort descending if you want, and then your data will be organized that way. And then the last thing that you can do is actually right-click any column header So if I right click F name right here, and you get access to a lot of the same tools. So if you wanted to remove this column this way, you can do it up here or here. So this is a common theme we'll see in Power BI time and time again. When we work with Query Editor, there's the same tools often available in multiple places. So, you know, you have multiple menus, multiple tabs, sometimes even multiple views within the Power BI file where you can access the same settings. So if we want to delete a column, we could just hit remove. The end, I removed my column. If you do Control Z right now, nothing's going to happen. But if I click this little X beside the remove column, well, then look at that, my data's back, and there's the F name back to where it belongs. Cool. So we're actually going to delete this table. This was just to kind of get our hands on with a very basic example. And I'm going to ask you guys to download the 2 CSV files that I have on Blackboard, and we're going to import them through Power BI's data import tool. So just going through here is the list of steps that we're going to do, and yeah, let's go for it. So we're going to click Get Data, Text CSV, and you're going to locate, obviously move the file where you want it to be first, and then connect it to your Power BI. So I already have my CSV files stored in a folder called CSV Files under Business Intelligence. And we're gonna only import the one file for now. We're gonna import products. And it will take a second. And you should have a screen that looks somewhat like this. I'm just gonna pop over to Microsoft Teams and see when you guys are good to go. You can send a thumbs up or something, or say you're good to go in the chat or something like that.
Yeah, got it.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So all right, so we're gonna look you'll see that automatically it detects the origin. So Western European Windows, it's delimited as commas. So if you ever need to change this, you could. Obviously, our CSV file is delimited by commas. And then there's something here called data type detection. And what that does is it's trying to detect what data type these columns need to be. So if they're going to be strings or, you know, floating points or integers or something like that. And it's going to base it off of the first 200 rows. Or you can change it to base it off the entire data set, or you can tell it not to detect the data types at all. And then we're going to be setting them, you know, manually. Basing it off the first 200 rows is fine. And if you were confident based off of this and you looked at your data and went through it, you could hit the load button, but we're actually going to, and I would highly suggest that 99.99% of the time, you hit the transform data button. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up the query editor window, right? So we ensure that our data type detection is correct, and then we're going to load our query editor. And this is the window that we were just in, right? You'll notice it's a much larger table. Here's our M code at the top, and you know, here's our query on the side. We've got one table, we've got our table name, and then if we look at the applied steps, we'll notice that the applied steps, there's already 3 steps, but I haven't done anything to the file. So how do we find out what's happening there? Well, let's expand our M code, because the M code holds all of the steps, right? It stores them and then it runs them against the table. So we'll expand this and we'll take a look at what's going on here. So if I click on the very first one called source, so click on source there in the applied steps pane on the right, you'll see that it's actually locating your file contents from, now yours is going to be different than mine. Mine's stored on my E file. The delimiter is a comma, there's 11 columns, et cetera, right? And if we go through here, let's click the next one called promoted headers. You can see this preview of data. Right now, I have something called column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4. Well, Power BI actually automatically detected that this first row, where it says product key, product subcategory key, product SKU, if I click this second applied step, we'll see that it promoted that first row to being the header of that column. So it promoted the headers, and now I've got headers for all of my columns. Now, if we look at this, we can see the data types for my product key. It says it's ABC, and my product subcategory key is also ABC. So that's wrong, right? Well, if we go through the last applied step, Power BI automatically changed the data types for those columns. So now this says 1, 2, 3. The SKU is still ABC, and if we go through this, we're going to go through all the way to the end. We can double check. This one's a floating point. This one's a string. You know, that it got them all correct. So there we go. Perfect. So automatically right off the bat, Power BI is doing a lot of awesome, you know, transformation on our data for us. Cool. So the next thing we want to notice is the table name, right? The table name got changed to AdventureWorks_products, whereas last time it was just called table. It's basing that off of the CSV file name. Well, we're going to want to change this right off the bat. So we're going to call it AW_product_lookup. And I'll explain why we're calling it lookup a lot later, but just for now, trust me, and we'll kind of keep this naming convention throughout. Okay, so that's I kind of forgot to caveat this. There's always two steps that I like to follow with my data when I'm importing my data into Power BI. Step one, right, is making sure that the table name is the name I want it to be. And then step two is doing a bit of QA or quality assurance and ensuring that all the columns and the data types on those columns are correct. So I always like to go through and scroll and look at my column headers to make sure that the data types here are correct. So let's do that. Let's look through and make sure that they look good. So we've got product key, which is an integer. We've got product subcategory key, which is also an integer. SKU is a string, product name is a string, model name is a string, description is a string, color is string. My product size is a string, and that's okay because I have some zeros, I have some numbers here, but I also have medium, small, and large. So we'll keep that as a string. Product style is fine, and then we've got two prices at the end. So that looks good to me. Okay, so we could technically update these last two currencies to fixed decimal numbers, you know, so that it's only 2 decimals. But I'll show you how to do that later in a separate setting. So once everything looks good and you've got your table name good and you've got your columns good, we want to hit this button, the close and apply button. So what that's going to do is it's going to close this query editor window and it's going to apply all of those changes. It's going to change the table name, it's going to import the data into Power BI, and we'll be good to go. So I'm going to click that button, and it's going to take a sec, and you'll just see it spinning a little bit on my machine here as it loads.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. So for product key and product subcategory key, I don't remember. I think I heard it on in one of the courses saying that columns like that, although it is integers, but it is just like just in numbering that we just put on the items that because we won't do any calculating for those columns, although they're integers, sometimes it is preferred to put them as strings instead of put them as integer type because we probably won't do any calculations on those columns. So I just want to know get your opinion on this.
On column like product subcategory key?
Yeah, and product keys, those kind of thing. Like, although those are integers, but it's just for categories, so we won't do any calculating on those columns.
Yeah, I can see your point on that. Actually, that's a valid point. Technically, I guess you could get into like the really small details of like what is faster for comparisons and stuff. So if you're ever going to be doing sorting on millions and millions of rows, is it faster to compare strings versus integers? And I get what you're saying. Like if you're not doing math on it, then it it shouldn't be an integer kind of thing. And yeah, if that's what you've been told, then I would go with that. You could change that to a string. I'm not going to worry about it too much today because we could change it if we wanted to. And this is such a small data set, it's not going to impact anything. But if that is, yeah, kind of what you've been told and you want to keep it as a string, then go for it on your end, because we won't be doing any calculations, with like 500 or 24 or anything like that. So.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
So essentially,
technically,
because we're... Hello?
Oh, yeah, you cut out for a sec there, sorry.
Oh, same, like, I didn't know you were talking. You cut out partway through, so I started saying something.
Yeah.
No, it's what I was trying to say is essentially because we're treating them as more of qualitative variables. So that's why I changed them from a numerical variable to a treat them as strings, because we're using them as a qualitative variable, not a quantitative variable.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you guys know, like technically on a large scale, what's more efficient, like comparisons of strings versus comparisons of ints?
I think ints is more efficient. I think it's smaller, saves memories and stuff, but I could be wrong.
Right, like, yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, I think an integer only takes up 8 bytes, and a varchar or something like that, like a string, can take up, I don't remember. I think it's bigger than 8 bytes though. Yeah, so I actually don't know like what a good answer for that is. If you've been told the other way to do it, like keep them as, if it's qualitative, then keep it as a string, then we can do that. We can do transform data and change those data types here. Just for the sake of argument, let's do that. So I think I just have to change type to, we want to change it to text, like that. So I just right-clicked the column. It should show like a little ABC. Oh, would you like to replace the existing conversion? Oh yes, because the old change type applied step. So what we'd like to do is probably replace the current, because instead of adding a new step, basically what this is saying is like you already changed this from a string to an int, and now you want to change it back from an int to a string. So do you want to still go string int string, or do you want to just keep it a string? And I'll just keep it a string. So I'm going to replace the current step so it's never changed. There we go. And then we can do the same thing here. I think you can also click the little 1, 2, 3 and then just change it to text. It's going to ask me the same question, and we can replace current. Cool. And then we can close and apply those changes. All right, so there we go. That's good to know.
Quick question. How do we, let's say you already clicked close and apply. How do we go back to the editor where you were and make those changes?
Oh, yes. So maybe I did that too quickly. So you want to click up at the top in your home tab. There's a spot called transform data, and you can either click the little pen with the graph, or you can click the down arrow and click transform data again, and then just make sure you have your table selected. Since we only have one table, it'll automatically select the AW product lookup table, but then it shows up here, and then you can make all of those changes. I could change these back to ints if I wanted to right now. Cool.
I'm
Okay.
sorry. Excuse me, I got confused. So you change the key into the text, but then isn't that you cannot sort it? Because if you sort it, it will go so for example, 1 and then 10 or 11 or they don't really go sorted.
Good point. That might be the only reason to store it as an int.
Yeah, because I think if you go back to the text, the string, then they won't go. So it won't go count them as a number. So it will actually go see that 1 into all of them would be 1 and 3. You see 3, see 1, 10, 11, 12. Then that will go one section.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So then, and then 2 shows up here after 19. So you know what? Maybe that that's a good point actually. So maybe that's a good argument to store it as an integer then, because that might be something in the future we want to do on the report is store them in sorted order, right? So I'm going to go back on my original theory and keep it as a whole number. And then let's try sorting it as a whole number here and see if that changes. Yeah. Right, because we might want to, we might want to sort it later on. And then this way we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's all in the right order. So I'm going to go back on what I said earlier, and we're going to keep it as a integer or whole number, sorry. And I'm going to turn off the sorting on this row. There we go. I'm going to turn off the sorting on this row. Perfect. Okay, cool. Hopefully everybody should be on the same page.
Yeah.
So a little flip flop, but okay, that's good. Are we all in agreement? Does that make sense as to why we're storing it that way?
Yeah,
Yes.
it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, cool. All right, awesome. So you might get taken back to this screen, right? So this is your report screen, and you guys said you had some experience with playing around with visuals and stuff on here. I'm not actually going to talk about this today too much. So actually what I want us to do is come over to the data tab, and you should see your data here now. And on the right hand side, we'll be able to see, if we expand this, all of our fields and all of our measures or metrics, which are the columns within that table. And even if I do go back to the report tab, I want you to notice that too on the right hand side here under the fields, just to the right of where all those visualizations are of different charts and stuff. You can expand that table and you can grab these metrics and use those as columns that we put into something like a bar chart or something like that. And you'll notice if we go to the model view, which is the last view that we haven't gone to, you'll notice that there's a new model on the model view represented kind of like a table. If you've ever seen an entity relationship diagram in SQL Server or something like that. So you'll see that model represented there with the table name and then all of the columns inside of it. And eventually we'll get to the point where we have multiple models on here and we're connecting the relationships between those models, right? So if you have like a SKU or an identifier code here that also has like acts many-to-many relationships in the future. Cool. Does everyone see those changes in Power BI once you hit apply?
Yeah.
If anyone is, okay, cool. If anyone's behind, just let me know right now. Say something in the chat or throw like a little thumbs down, and we can make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay. That's good. Okay, cool. So one slide here that I want to show you, I'm going to bring my PowerPoint over. It's easier to explain it like this. So I'm going to talk a little bit for the remainder, the last 20 minutes of class about text tools. And I might not get to talk about everything, and that's fine. We'll continue next week where we leave off today. But there's a bunch of text-specific tools, and you'll notice this is in the Transform tab, where you can actually, format your text to lowercase, uppercase, or if you wanted to capitalize each word. So if it was like a first and last name, you can format your text to very specific ways. If you wanted to trim off all of the excess space characters. You know, as a human, it's impossible for us to see if there's a trailing space because it's invisible to the naked eye, right? But if you highlight it, or you know, if you use the trim function, then it will trim off all those blank extra trailing spaces. And sometimes you might have a user in your database like Bob Smith, and then a Bob Smith with a trailing space at the end of Smith, and the computer thinks that they're two unique objects if you're comparing the strings, right? Because they're technically unique. One has a trailing space. Them first and then remove the duplicates. So there's all these handy functions under the Format tab here. We can also extract code, sorry, not code, we can extract text. We can get the first number of characters from a string. We can get the last X number of characters from a string. We can take a range, or we can do something like text before or after or between delimiters. So if you wanted to get you know, text before the letter L or something like that, then you could use that setting there as well. So we're going to get a little bit hands-on with some text-specific tools. Just going to move that over out of the way. There we go. And back to Power BI, we're going to import the other CSV file. So click Get Data. Text CSV. You're going to get a little bit of practice with this today because we just did it. So we're now going to import the second file that I uploaded to Blackboard, which is the customers file. And we're going to hit open and perform the same quality assurance that we performed on the first table, where we changed the name. We made sure that all the columns were the right data types, and we're going to make sure all of our data is right before we actually load it in. So once you're on this screen, we're going to hit the transform data button, right? We don't want to hit load. We want to hit transform data because we want to actually open the query editor and make sure that everything's correct. So the query editor opens and we can take a look at our data here. We're going to change the table name. That'll be the first thing we do while it's on our mind. And we're going to change it to the same format as the other tables. So we did AW underscore customer underscore lookup. All right. And now we're going to look through all the columns. This is an int, string. Birth date is a date. Marital status is just a single string. That's good. The gender, okay. Email address. Income's that actually got it as a currency, so that's cool. Total children. String. Okay, so that looks good to me. All right. Now, before we hit close and apply, there's a couple things that I want to change. So looking through this at the data, there's actually, you know, these ones here, prefix, first name, and last name. They're all caps, right? And I don't want my names and my last names and my prefixes to be all capitals. I just want the first letter to be a capital. So what we can do is we can actually use the transform tab, okay, to actually capitalize the first letter of each word. Now, I'm going to show you, and I want you to follow along with me so you understand the key difference between transform and add a column, okay? So with the prefix column selected, okay, so you'll know it's selected when it's like a yellow highlighted like that. Go into the add column tab at the top of your query editor. And then I want you to hit this format button. And in the drop down arrow from format, I want you to click capitalize each word, okay? And you'll notice what that does is, okay, this is the data we want. You know, it says Mr., Mrs., Miss, and the M's are capitals, but you know, the R and the S's aren't. Well, the problem is it added a new column called capitalized each word, but my old column prefix is still here. Well, that delete this, or I can actually just close this inserted capitalized each word. Like I can easily change this column name and then I can go over and I can delete the old one if I really wanted to, but there's a way to just do this a lot easier. So I'll just remove that, or I can actually just close these both in the applied steps. Okay, and so now that column's never existed. And what I want you to do now instead is select the prefix tab, but instead of being in the add column tab group, go to the transform tab group. And then from there, I want you to use the format button in the drop down and select capitalize each word. And what transform does that's different than add column, and this can be confusing at first, but it sounds simple when you say it. Transform makes the update to the current column and it overwrites the data that's there, right? So if I don't want these capital Mr. and Mrs. at all, then I'll use transform because it'll replace them. Whereas add column will append it to the end of the table and it will keep the original column that the new data is based off of. So if you want to keep it and still have the new column based off of that data, then you use add column. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it can be a little bit confusing. Hopefully you'll see the difference. If I click this button, capitalize each word, you see it actually just updated that column and replaced all of those data values and it made them capitalized. Okay, cool. So we actually want to do this for first name and last name, and we're going to do a 2-for-1 special. We're going to hold shift and we're going to do transform, same thing, format, and capitalize each word. So you can hold shift while you do this to multiple columns, which is actually really helpful. So you don't have to last name and prefix, and they're all the right casing. Okay, cool. Now, what if I wanted a column called full name that had their prefix, their first name, and their last name all together? Well, I can actually use something called the merge tool. So what we want to do is select all 3 columns. And you'll notice when I have multiple columns selected, this merge columns button has appeared. But whoop, hold on, danger, okay? This merge columns, if I'm under the transform option, okay, this is dangerous. It's going to replace those 3 columns and merge them into one. If I want to keep these separate columns, but add a new column and merge these, then I'll go to the add column, okay? And then click merge columns from there. And then what that will do is that'll make a new column that merges those 3 columns into one, but keeps the old ones. All right. So here we'll choose how to merge the selected columns. The separator will be a space, and then the new column name, we will create it to be full name. All right, and hit OK. And now if we go to the end of our data, here we've got Mr. John Yang, Mr. Eugene Huang, etc., etc. And perfect. We still have our old individual first name, last name columns, as well as the full name column. Okay, and notice the step on the right here, inserted merged column. Well, originally this would have been called merged column, but I renamed it to full name. We can actually change this so it's a more meaningful applied step, because I might not remember what that does if I come back to this next week. And I'm like, what does insert merged column mean? Inside of any applied step, and you can actually change the name of that applied step. So if I just click this here and click the gear, I believe that was it. Oh, right click, sorry. You have to right click on the applied step and then I can rename it right there. I can edit the settings, I can delete it. So we'll just rename it. And instead of saying insert merged column, I'm gonna say inserted full name column, right? And now that means more to me. Cool. Now I can remember that's what that applied step does. So if I am going to accidentally delete this, I know it's going to delete the full name column. Cool. How's everyone following along so far? I know that might have been a little bit much, but hopefully people are keeping track.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Yeah.
So far, so good. Awesome. Okay, cool. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just saying pretty well.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So last little section here, and then we'll wrap it up. So a little bit more text formatting. Before we hit apply and close on this, okay, there's a couple more things I want to do. So we've got our first name and we've got our full name. Let's take a look at the email address, okay? And let's say, for example, we want to get the username of their email. Well, here I've got john24@adventureworks.com. So technically I could take the first 5 letters and get John24, and that would be correct. But it wouldn't work for the second example, Eugene10, because his is one in this case is I have to actually use the delimiter. And what that means is it's a symbol or something that represents the breaking point of what you're going to grab. So you're going to grab from the beginning until the delimiter. And in this case, we'll make our delimiter the @ sign since all the emails have the @ symbol. So what we want to do is select the email address column, because that's the column we're going to be transforming or grabbing data from. And we're going to make sure we're under add column because we don't want to replace the email addresses. We want to still keep our email addresses. We're going to make a new column called usernames, and we're going to extract the username from that email address. So under the extract button, excuse me, there is a text before delimiter option. And if we click that, a little window will pop up, text before delimiter, and we can set what the delimiter is. So here I'm going to make my delimiter the @ symbol, and under advanced options you could change a couple of these things. It could be from the start of the input, or it could be like 2 letters in. We don't need to touch any of that. We'll just leave it, from the very beginning. And all we have to do is set it to the @ sign and click OK. And once we click OK, we should see a new column at the end. And there we go. We've got John24, we've got Eugene10, and it grabbed all of those usernames. Now you'll notice the column name is wrong. It's called text before delimiter. So we want to rename, if I just right click this, we can rename this column down here at the bottom. There's this rename option. So right click that column, rename, and we'll rename it to username, okay? And click and new column. Now let's say we wanted to get the domain name as well. Okay, well, we can see that this is john@adventureworks.com. So the domain name, which is AdventureWorks, is in between that @ symbol and the .com. So the domain is AdventureWorks. We can actually grab, so if I highlight email address again, we can grab text between 2 delimiters, right? So the first delimiter being the @ symbol and the second delimiter being .com or just dot. So if I select email address and go to extract, there's an option under extract that says text between delimiters. So we'll click text between delimiters, and it's going to ask for a first delimiter and a second delimiter. So the start delimiter will be our @ symbol, and then here in the end delimiter you can write .com, or you can simply just put dot. Okay, and so we can click OK. Again, we don't need to touch the advanced options. Make sure you're adding a new column, not transforming. And there we go, we've got AdventureWorks. I'm going to rename this column to domain because text between delimiters doesn't really make sense to anybody. So there's domain. And let's say, for example, I want to remove the hyphens from this because Adventure-Works isn't the actual name of the company. Well, let's remove all hyphens from this column. So if I select the domain column, we can actually use the transform format tool. So now we're not adding a new column. We actually want to replace the information here, right? We don't want that hyphen anymore. So go to your transform tab. Okay, and that's actually in a different section, a different grouping. So typically we've been here in the text column section. These are all tools that we can use to modify text. These tools here you can use on any column. So these tools you can use on strings, you can use them on integers. So replace values, we want to use replace values right here from this group. And when I click this, replace values, a little box will pop up with the value to find and the value to replace. So I want to replace hyphens and I want to replace them with a space. So I'll just do one single space and hit OK. And what that's going to do is going to replace all of those hyphens in AdventureWorks. And there we go. If you wanted to capitalize it, you could capitalize it. If you wanted to leave them all uppercase, then you could do that too. We'll just leave that for now. Perfect. So there we go. We've got our domain name set. And with that done, what we can do is go back to the Home tab and hit Close and Apply, which will actually apply all of those applied steps to our data through the M code. And it's going to load it into the data model. It's going to load it into our data view, and it's going to also add those fields to the report tab so we can add visuals for them. So we'll see here, I'm on the model view. You should see 2 of these tables now. All right. And you should also, if you go to the data view, depending on the table you click on the right, your data preview will change. Right. So here I can see my products, and here I can see my customers. And if I go to the final view, the report view, well, then here I can see I've got 2 tables that I can select metrics from. I can select my customer data or I can select my product data. So you should be able to see 2 of those tables. The clearest way to tell if you've done it correctly is probably so show of thumbs. Show of thumbs. How many of you guys got both of those imported correctly into your Power BI? Awesome.
So can you just repeat what you said, like on how to verify if it's correct or no?
Yeah, so you'll just see the 2 tables. So you'll see this table here, the product lookup, and you'll see your customer lookup.
So that's good for me. Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Cool. That's great. Abhi, right? I can say Abhi. Abhi.
Yes, yes, perfect, perfect.
Okay. Nice. Okay, cool. Well, I know it was a very simple intro, and I know you guys have played around with BI before a little bit. I don't know if you guys have done stuff with the text tools, so hopefully this was helpful. Have you guys covered some of those tools before, or is this new?
No, this is completely new for us. So like, I guess the only get data we have done, that feature we have used and later visualized it. That's all.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so that's awesome then. This is new. I'm going to end the recording here. Is there any questions before I end the recording? Or is that good?
Everything is good for now.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll end the recording, and then that'll be it for week 1.